loving you until the day I die. Now and then there's a fool such as I, such as I. Oh yes, a little bit of Elvis on the radio to brighten our day. Now, speaking of people doing foolish things, let me ask you a question. Would you take advice from a fool? You know, as a general rule, we would say, why, no thank you. But what if that fool was King Solomon? Now, that may seem odd for me to say. We're talking about the wisest man in the world. I'm calling him a fool. But actually, I get that description from Solomon himself. When you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you're reading the memoirs of an older man looking back, reflecting on his life. And in that book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon confessed to his readers that he had done many foolish things. His life had been filled with vanity. He says, for example, that I considered all my activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted, and when I got done I said, it was all vanity. Perhaps you recognize that refrain that comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. We try to translate that today in something meaningful. You might put it this way, meaningless. Everything I did was meaningless. Or the way I like to put it, wasted. My life was wasted. A lot of wasted years in the things that I did. You see, King Solomon was a man of contradictions. On the one hand, he was blessed with wisdom. And yet, on the other hand, he was driven by an insatiable desire. He wanted to know everything that could be known. I mean, God gave him this wisdom and the capacity for knowing things, to study anything he wanted. Solomon wanted to study everything. He wanted to try everything that could be done. And with Solomon, that would be good things and bad things, smart things and foolish things. Solomon says that I set my mind to know wisdom, but also to know madness and folly. If something was good, I tried it. If something was stupid, I tried that as well. Solomon wanted to try everything. With Solomon, there was no self-restraint. He says that all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not restrain my heart from any pleasure. If I wanted it, I did it. And after all, he was the king, one of the wealthiest men in the world. If he wanted it, he could afford it, he could order it, he got it. I call Solomon a wise fool. He was both wise and foolish. Now, he spoke words of wisdom. That's what we have recorded for us in the book of Proverbs, for example. But at the same time, he made foolish choices. And that's what he tells us about in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, here's the way it worked for Solomon. He knew what was right, but he often chose to do otherwise. He knew what was wrong, and he did it anyway. He did not practice what he preached. Does any of that sound familiar? Because that's not an uncommon thing, for people to know right and wrong and still make bad choices. Well, that was King Solomon. Now, Solomon did all sorts of foolish things that he records for us. For example, Solomon loved material possessions. He loved things, the things of this world. He sent his envoys out to get him a collection of everything he could find out there in this world. If it was there, if it could be bought, he bought it. He wanted something of everything under his possession. He also indulged in food and wine. And as he tells us, he did it to excess. He might advise me and you to stay away from gluttony and drunkenness. But he, as the king, he'd do it anyway. And women? Oh, he loved the women. Now, nothing wrong with that. But he accumulated women. 700 wives, 300 concubines. Something is wrong with that man. And he did something that was unthinkable, especially someone raised by the great King David, whose heart was devoted to God. Solomon even interacted with pagan gods and pagan rituals, a story I'll tell you about some other time. He tried everything that could be tried just to see what it was like. You see why I call Solomon a wise fool. Now, in the book of Proverbs, there are proverbs where Solomon will say, the wise man does this, but the fool does that. Now, when he does that, he is the wise man and the fool. That is, he uses his life as an example of both. Here's what I know is the right thing to do. Here's what I did. You see, Solomon sets himself up as the wise man and the fool. Now that raises the question, what went wrong with this man? I mean, after all, he prayed that great prayer, Lord, give me the wisdom to rule and rule well. And God blessed him with a gift that we would envy. So what went wrong? Well, you see, in Solomon, there was a character flaw. The character flaw was this. He had the wisdom to know what he ought to do, to discern what was right, what was righteousness, what was sin, what was good, what was bad, what was smart, and what was foolish. Now, he had all of that. But Solomon was lacking the will to do what he ought to do. You see, he knew what to do. He didn't have the willpower to get it done. Solomon had no self-restraint. He couldn't hold himself back from something. He had no self-discipline. He didn't know how to make himself do what needs to be done, even if it was against what he felt like doing. You see, Solomon did what he felt like doing, even though he knew it was wrong. This is the wise man playing the fool. Well, that's part of the story of King Solomon. Now, you know, that's how fools do. They do what feels okay to them. As Solomon says in the book of Proverbs, the way of a fool seems right in his own eyes. I mean, he looks at the situation and says, why not? It's not going to do any harm. Everybody else is doing it. Nobody's going to know. See, the way of a fool seems right in his own eyes, but a wise man will listen to good counsel. Solomon himself was the guy giving the good advice. He should have listened to his own advice. Solomon also warns us that when you do what you think you want to do, what you feel like doing, there's usually trouble in the end. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. That's what happens when you do what you feel like doing and go contrary to God's will. Solomon would have done well to read his own book of Proverbs and learn the lessons he tried to teach others. For example, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, a passage you should always know. Memorize it. Here's what Solomon said. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Right off the bat, Solomon knows what needs to be done. You need to listen to what God says in His Word. Don't be listening to what you feel like, what you want. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. That's the key to success. That's the key to wisdom, is to trust in the Lord and not in yourself. Trust in His will and His ways, not in your feelings, what you want to do. You know, with King Solomon, what we have is a cautionary tale. You'll notice with Solomon, you got the wisest man in the world, and a man of great knowledge as well. But listen, folks, you can have academic degrees and still be a fool. I know, I used to work in the academic institutions, and I know what it's like to see a PhD who still doesn't have any common sense, can't figure out what to do. You can have all the degrees and knowledge you want and still be a fool. You can be the smartest person in the room and still be a fool. For you see, real wisdom is not just knowing, but it's knowing and doing. Well, Solomon had the knowing all right. He just couldn't make himself do what he knew he ought to do. Now, God will help you with the knowing. He's given you a gift of wisdom, as great as the gift that Solomon had. Now, it's not something he dropped in your head. No, it's the Bible, the inspired Word of God. It is filled with wisdom and knowledge and understanding, and if you invest the time in the reading and the studying, you will grow in your knowledge and wisdom of what is right and what is wrong. See, God's helped you. His Word will help you with the knowing. Now you are responsible for the doing.